You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network. For more quality options programs, visit www.theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app, available in iTunes and on Google Play.
And now, it's time for the show that breaks down the options market from unusual activity alerts to market analysis, strategy overviews, listener questions, and much more. If it involves puts and calls, then our all-star panel will break it down. It's time to hit the Option Block with your host, Mark Longo from the Options Insider Media Group and co-hosts Uncle Mike Tusaw from St. Charles Wealth Management, Mark the Greasy Meatball Sebastian from OptionPit.com, Andrew the Rock Lobster Giovinazzi from OptionPit.com, and Henry the FlowMaster Schwartz from SIBO. The Option Block is brought to you by SIBO. SIBO's suite of S&P 500 index options, SPX and mini S&P 500 XSP options, allows traders to speculate on the direction of the market, generate income, and hedge for downside protection of their portfolio of stocks. No matter what kind of trader you are, there's plenty of useful information to take the guesswork out of creating your portfolio strategy and to help you make more educated moves in the market. Visit www.sibo.com/SPX today to learn more. The views expressed herein are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of CBOE Global Markets Incorporated or any of its subsidiaries, collectively CBOE. The information provided is for general education and information purposes only. There are important risks associated with transacting in any of the CBOE products or any of the digital assets discussed here. Before engaging in any transactions in those products or digital assets, it is important for market participants to carefully review the disclosures and disclaimers contained at www.cboe.com/US_disclaimers. These products and digital assets are complex and are suitable only for sophisticated market participants. These products involve the risk of loss, which can be substantial and, depending on the type of product, can exceed the amount of money deposited in establishing the position. Market participants should put at risk only funds they can afford to lose without affecting their lifestyle. And now, get ready to hit the Option Block.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Option Block Monday episode. Doing something a little bit different this week. No live shows hitting the network this week. Doesn't mean you won't get your fill of on-demand content. And you know what? Nothing can stop the FlowMaster when he sees some interesting developments in the market that he wants to share with you. So even though we're not recording any live shows, he wanted to share his thoughts with you guys and gals out there about the big sell-off on Friday and some of the interesting developments they've seen in VIX as a result. And we thought we can't hold on to it till the Thursday time slot, so we're giving it to you early on Monday. Enjoy and take it away, Mr. FlowMaster.
Hi, Mark, and hello, all of our listeners. We're not going to be taping on Thursday, but today is Friday, August 1st, and I thought that we could take a little look at the market because it's a little different than what we saw in July, that's for sure. So some relatively rough earnings moves, particularly Amazon, but also Coinbase and a few others, started us on a pretty sharp down note. Right now, the SPX is off almost 1.7%. It's about midday on Friday. VIX is over 21. Russell and NASDAQ are also down about 2%. It's an interesting move. We're seeing it is pretty broad. It's hitting all the sectors. Let's just see which is holding up the best. Consumer staples is relatively flat, and also healthcare. But everything else, we're talking technology, we're talking financials, energy, all getting hit pretty hard. This is also on some revisions to some economic stats that the market did not like. But I did want to mention a couple of things that are interesting. One is a white paper that we just put out, written by my colleague Ed Tom, called the VIX Decomposition. And basically what it does is it takes the VIX index, which I think most people are very familiar with. Sometimes they call it the fear gauge. It goes up basically when the market tends to sell off sharply. It goes down when we rally. There's a relatively strong negative correlation. However, what Ed shows is actually about 20% of the time, it is not negatively correlated. There's days where the market goes up and VIX goes up and vice versa. And the approach to a decomposition is relatively straightforward. We basically divide the SPX options that are used in the VIX calculation into 6 segments. So if you think about it, you have at the money vol, you have the far tails on the call side and the put side, you have the meteor 20-25 delta options or so. And what we're seeing today with the VIX up almost 4 points is a little bit interesting. We're actually seeing a pretty solid spike to a parallel shift of the SPX, the volatility surface at that 30-day term. But we're also seeing some interesting upside convexity increase, meaning that the far out of the money call wing volatilities that go into the VIX are actually leading things a little bit. And I was just talking to another colleague about why this might be. And, today's also the tariff deadline after the last pause, and that also might be contributing to the sell-off. But we all know what happened when those initial Liberation Day tariffs were modified or stalled, and the market exploded higher on April 9th. So it's possible that we're seeing some upside interest just in the case of some sort of a pretty sharp bounce like that. And I will give you a couple odd block trades today too as well, just because then we'll have a whole week to see how they panned out. One of them's interesting. So Bristol Myers on the odd block that we taped yesterday on Thursday, the last day of July, we actually talked about a put buyer into earnings in BMY who really did very well. Basically, shares sold off into earnings and then they sold off after earnings. That trader turned $200,000 into, I believe, around $500,000. One of the interesting odd blocks this morning is actually a call buyer in BMY. So this is in the August 45 calls. Buyer paid 80 cents for about 6,000 in a big sweep. And it's a pretty big trade. It is opening. And it could be that same trader basically really surfing the stock. It's up 85 cents today, so it's at 44.16. So these August 15th, this is just a 1-week trade. And the buyer paying 80 cents for them. Let's just see where they're trading right now. They're trading about 70 cents. The stock was at 44.16. When they bought them. Right now, the stock is a little bit lower than that, about flat, actually. So we'll be watching that. Another one I think is a little bit interesting is this name I'm not familiar with, AMTM, Momentum Holdings. And they do have earnings next week. And the call volume in AMTM is 5 times normal, 1,900 contracts, against a whopping 20 puts have traded. And this name only trades on average about 500 calls and 300 puts. This trade is a buyer of 1,600 of the September 30 calls. They swept those. They paid, the sweep actually had 97 parts to it, basically 39 to 40 cents, but paying 40 cents on most of those. Those are opening. I don't know the name super well, but that is kind of a pretty clear position. It expires in 49 days, so they have some time for it to work. It's 23% out of the money, though. And AMTM stock is at the upper end of its range. It's traded from 16 to 33. It was 16 just in April, right around the whole tariff kerfuffle. It was 33.40 a year ago, actually last November. This is a pretty solid trade at the 30 strike. Kind of reminds me of those Unity software calls that we talked about, because those were the 30 strike. Those worked out pretty well for the buyer. That's it. It'll be interesting to see how things pan out. It's definitely a little bit of a sharp sell-off. The Dow's down about 600 points right now, S&P over 100 points. You got to remember we had a very strong July. The truth is we've had positive months for May, June, and July after that April bottom. So yeah, it doesn't bother me too much that we're seeing a little bit of a pullback. I think it's probably a pretty healthy move, but we'll have to see if there's any little shakeout here. Even crypto's seen a little risk off. That's down about 2% coin, looking at the SIBO coin index. I hope everybody has a good week. Stay safe, and I'll talk to you soon.
The Option Block is brought to you by SIBO. When it comes to trading volatility, trust SIBO, the creator of the VIX Index, for in-depth and relevant information. SIBO's tools and services gives you up-to-date trade insights, analysis, and positions of VIX options and futures. No matter what kind of trader you are, there's plenty of useful information to take the guesswork out of creating your portfolio strategy and to help you make more educated moves in the market. Visit www.cboe.com/VIX today to learn more.